Hello, my name is Ariel Clouse, and this is my Discussion 3 video reflection for SE502. As someone who has grown up with family members who have speech differences, it has simply always been a part of who I am. I never really saw the differences as preventing them from being successful or living a happy and normal life, so I never really put much stock in the differences. One of my cousins, who's 2 years younger than me, has phonological differences when he speaks, but he cognitively was always right where I was, and I just never really noticed any differences about him. I think because of my upbringing with somebody who exhibited phonological differences, I continued to be open minded about other individuals that I met who had articulation, phonological, and speech differences. Exposure to somebody with these differences as a young person allowed me to be very open and respectful to others that I met through my life. As an educator, when speaking to a non-educator, it's important to make sure that you always come at these discussions with empathy and understanding. If you're speaking down to somebody, the likelihood of what you have to say making an impact with them really goes a lot lower. So I think that it's important that when you're discussing the concept of speech differences, you want to make sure these points are straightforward, relatable, and respectful. Recently, I was having a conversation with one of my bandmates that a speech difference is viewed a lot different than a physical difference, but overall, they can operate the same way. Just because somebody has a physical disability, let's say they use a wheelchair to get around, it doesn't mean that they are unable to get around. They just look a little bit different. They need some different supports to perform the task, but they're still able to. The same can be said for anybody that has a speech difference. It may take them a little longer to articulate what they want to say, or they may need to communicate in a different way, but that doesn't mean that their method of communication is less than that of a typical peer, and it doesn't mean that they are unable to still communicate. Um, it's important to make sure that you're always being respectful to those people, whether that's students or adults who do exhibit speech differences. One thing that somebody who I'm close to has pointed out that is a frustration for them is they are somebody with a stutter. Um, Oftentimes, instead of people waiting for them to complete their sentence or their thought, folks will try to fill in the blank for them. My friend is perfectly capable of finishing a sentence. Sometimes he just needs to take a beat to finish it. So, one thing that I will always tell folks is if they are speaking to somebody who has these differences and you maybe don't know how to proceed, it's completely okay to ask them, do you want me to wait until you finish your sentence? Do you want me to provide prompts? Essentially, just be respectful, and if you don't know, ask. That's the biggest thing that I can impart from an educator's perspective to a non-educator who is working with or talking with somebody who might have speech exceptionalities. Obviously, audio perceptions have a big impact on our students and how they are perceived, both in short term and long term. In our classroom, when students are younger, there's going to be a lot of different speech exceptionalities, articulation, and phonological differences. However, as they get older, those speech differences will become a little bit more pronounced and therefore differentiate them from their non-disabled peers. One problem that we see is that teachers may lower their expectations for students with a speech disorder, but that should not be the case. While this student has a difficult time with a certain sound or articulating themselves clearly, that doesn't mean that they are incapable of completing work, engaging in peer relationships, enjoying extracurricular activities, and doing anything else that every other student in your classroom can do. Um, These differences, however, can cause some negative feelings of self for those students. So we're talking about things like lowered self-esteem or confidence. They might be less willing to participate in classroom activities and discussion, and they may not engage in peer relationships as much. As the teacher, I think that it's very important to advocate for these students, to their general education teacher and their peers. And something that I find really important that I work on with my students is that as these students get older, I want to see them become advocates for themselves. So, a great example would be my friend who tells folks, if I'm stuttering, just give me a moment and let me get through that. In an inclusive environment, differences are celebrated and accepted. So the more that we can do as teachers in order to create that environment, the better off our students will be. Students who are coached in empathy and understanding will be open-minded and kind to students with differences and provide an environment where they can thrive and feel like they can express themselves. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a wonderful day.